Hello, everyone, and welcome to Kunsang Pile Choling, where we're so pleased to bring you another teaching by Jetsunma, Ahkon, Lhamo. This one is Awaken, Effortless Compassion. It was originally taught back in 1997. So, with no further ado,
I'm remembering something that happened to me that stuck in my mind very, very clearly, and it gave me pause and made me wonder. And now I feel like I understand this event much better than I did before. This was the first time I had actually, not the first time actually, the second time that I had seen His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And he was seeing a group of practitioners here in this area. And he posed a question. Now you have to understand that was when I was just starting out. So I was fairly well rested and pretty enthusiastic still. And naively hopeful beyond belief. Not that those things have changed so radically that there's no hope, but things have changed. So on seeing the Dalai Lama, he posed a question to the leaders of the different groups. And he said, "So, what do you think? Do you think things are getting better?" You know, and I thought about what was happening in our group. I thought about that we were learning some practice, that we were learning to practice Ngundro, that we were thinking in terms of compassion, that we were thinking in terms of living the life of a renunciate. There were so many things that we had come in contact with that I felt surely would make our lives, and hopefully the lives of anyone we have come in contact with, much better. And I knew personally I was working really hard to help people to understand Buddhism a little better. So when he said, "How do you think things are going? Do you think there's any improvement?" I just went, "Well, yeah. And he actually pointed to me and he said, "Do you think there's any improvement?" And I went, "Yeah." Because I felt like, you know, I was trying to get my job done, and the people around me I saw looked like they were trying really hard. And so he asked a bunch of other people, and people had different responses. But then he said, "As for me, I don't think there's much change. I don't think things are much better." And I went, you know how that deer in headlights look you get when the teacher asked you a question in front of everybody and God and Buddha. You have showed that you don't know anything. So you start doing that I thing. You know? But he went on to say that, yes, many things were happening, that indeed the Dharma did seem to be spreading. It did seem that people were interested in the Dharma. It did seem that as a culture we have a certain affinity for it. But he said, ultimately, when you look at the big picture and you see samsara and all its gooey glory, just revolving around and around and around, and death and rebirth, these cycles constantly repeating themselves. And then when you look at the activities of sentient beings, how even when we are taught differently, even when, well, sometimes a mirror is held up to us and we can really see some of our own activities and see what non-virtue they produce or unhappiness they produce. Still, even with all of that pointed out, His Holiness said that the kind of change we're talking about takes a very long time, an extremely long time. And so I thought, in my naivete, my innocence, and my just got started attitude, I thought, well, I know that's true. I mean, I know that's true. Samsara is endless. It's just this wheel of death and rebirth continues around and around and around, and the depths of samsara are beyond understanding. So I knew that theoretically, but I thought, but doesn't it make things a little better that, well, like for instance, in our little Maryland group, that we have some people here in this group that are praying now constantly that never prayed before. That's something, isn't it? And I remember thinking, yeah, and my students are honestly starting to connect some dots. We're honestly starting to understand some cause and effect relationships. Admittedly, not all the time, and we can't always demonstrate it, but hey, once in a while we can see some dots are connected. And there are some fundamental thoughts in the Buddhist teachings that I can see we're beginning to get. And I thought, why doesn't that count? I mean, if His Holiness says things aren't getting any better, then they're not getting any better, because I would trust his judgment on things like that. Of course. But then I looked around and I thought, well, what am I seeing then? What is all this? And I had really no way to deal with that. And I thought, okay, well, I'm gonna try to keep on doing what I'm doing and give it my best shot, and maybe the next time I see him, if he ever asks me that question, he'll tell me, yes, there's been a change. But I really did not understand his teaching at that point. But I understand it now. I understand it all too well now. For one thing, His Holiness was trying to give us a sense of time in a way that is foreign to us. And a sense, even though at first when I heard that from him, it sounded like this message of hopelessness. We're never going to get any better. Oh my gosh, you know, all this effort we've put into it. How can it not be getting any better at all? And yet I realized that his message was a different message. It wasn't one of hopelessness. It was a reality check. And it was a caution to me, and I think to other practitioners as well, certainly other leaders of groups as well, that if you expect change to happen overnight, you will be very disappointed. Even for your own practice. Even if you've been practicing, let's say, for a decade, and you expect that by now you might be able to dissolve the deity and remain there in equipoise for a fraction of a second by now. Surely you can. And you think, I've been doing this for 10 years. How long does it take? So, you know, you go through all these different practices and you think, well, you know, must be that even though I can't tell that I'm doing any better in my meditation, surely I am. You know, surely there's some kind of magical thing that's happening here beneath the surface, and no one can see it but the holy ones. And you're thinking, oh, I'm sure. It's just, you know, Lord Buddha, I'm sure is smiling on me even now. But according to the Dalai Lama, that may not be the case. I think what His Holiness was trying to help us with is that if we are that impatient with ourselves and one another, and with the world in general, we're going to run ashore. You know, we're going to dry up. It's going to be very hard. If we understand that we are part of a great wave or part of a great movement, that in its power is profound, in its depth and meaning is profound, And yet, in its ability to change things quickly, well, maybe not that profound. But we are part of something that is an activity that is different from what we ordinarily see in the world. It is an extraordinary activity, is an activity that is geared towards resolving and dissolving the obstacles associated with samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth. That's an important thing. Where else can you do that? I mean, if you get a job, you may get a job that helps people in some way, like you could be a used car salesman. And once in a while, you could actually sell somebody a car that works. So that's helping people, isn't it? And, you know, maybe you could get a job where you're a social worker or a doctor or a nurse or, you know, whatever it is that maybe you can just hang out in a soup kitchen and help out there. Whatever it is that you can do, that you can help with, you think, yeah, I think I'm making a difference. But of course, if we refer back to the Buddha's teachings, the Buddha says that using the tools and drawing on the resources that we have in this lifetime, that means our ordinary workaday capacities, our ordinary samsaric traits and characteristics and abilities. Using those, the Buddha teaches us, we can only make a difference within samsara itself. But to bring about the miracle of exiting samsara, to bring about, well, I have to say miracle again, the miracle of emptying samsara from its depths. That's going to take a little time, and we're not going to do it as used car salesmen or doctors or nurses or anything like that. That event is an ongoing, huge, momentous kind of progression of a cycle that takes a very long time, a very long time. So there are two messages here. On the one hand, since there's so much to do and such a large event that has to take place, this emptying of samsara, which seems endless, really, then in one way there's no time to lose. Get on it right away. Jump on that stick. Get on it as soon as you can and really work hard. But His Holiness, in his maturity as a spiritual being, said, but also understand to give yourself a break if in 10 years you're not walking on water yet. Any of you doing that I don't know about? Because I would like a demo. So, His Holiness was offering us a little piece of His spiritual maturity. Now, you understand from His Holiness's point of view? Well, no, we don't understand from His Holiness's point of view. None of us do. But let me try to give you a little bit of information. His Holiness isn't just hanging out here in middle age. His Holiness has been doing this for a very long time. He has been reborn into the same position again and again and again and again. And he's a Buddha. He's highly realized. He is awake. So he must have some sense of continuum. I can only guess that there is some memory, some sense of continuum that is with him. He has a perspective that we simply don't have. And he has had the opportunity to look at the great picture. And during the time of his reign, not only in this lifetime, but in other lifetimes as well, look at what he has seen. He has seen Tibet go from a place that never got any visitors, I mean ever, and had never seen Caucasians or anybody else for that matter, from being that isolated Shangri-La picture that many of us have heard about and romanticized in our minds, all the way to seeing the fall of Tibet, to seeing his precious Dharma go out into the world. And in a sense for him, even though he is the leader of any form of Tibetan Buddhism, there is something of a loss of control in watching the Buddha Dharma go out into the world and not being able to stay in touch with it, at every occasion, the way he probably could to a greater degree while he was in Tibet. So he's seen this kind of thing. He's seen something rise up and become extraordinary. He's seen that thing fall through his fingers like sand. And then he's seen this new birth, this new vision, this new appearance of Dharma all over the world. Now, from his point of view, think what he's seeing. Like waves, he's seeing something that rises, something that falls, something that rises again, something that simply is in cyclic movement. And that maturity tends to have, or that overview tends to have a couple of different effects on us. One of the effects is that it will break your heart. Just break your heart to give your whole life and to give all of your focus to that which you hope will benefit sentient beings, to that which you know has the capacity to benefit sentient beings. And to see time tick by and years pass and your own life move on and still so much suffering. How to do that? How to have the kind of strength to dedicate yourself from the time of your birth till the time of your passing, and beyond that, to the cessation of suffering, while still seeing in your eyes so much suffering, and sometimes it seems to get worse and worse. How to maintain that kind of courage. To see that kind of event with samsara continuing on and just plowing through, just continuing on no matter what we do, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking, and it takes a tremendous amount of courage for these teachers who we have to have an immense respect for, who come again and again and again, hoping to make a difference at some point. And yet, there is another thought that comes also when we think about how samsara is endless and how it just keeps going on no matter what we do. While we have to jump on it, and we can't let ourselves get away with murder. We have to be mature about it and give ourselves a break as well. We have to be somewhat relaxed. We have to be able to be in it for the long haul, because the long haul is a whole different picture than a little stint as a Buddhist. Believe me, the long haul is a whole different picture. Speaking from the perspective as a tulku, I have to say, you read all these teachings about how the tulku is a marvelous thing. When a tulku appears in the world, the great bodhisattvas, their efforts are, their work is effortless and spontaneous. Once I'd like to see that. I don't know who they were talking about when they wrote that line, but effortless hasn't shown up yet. Spontaneous maybe, but effortless hasn't shown up yet. So now we come to the point where we have to gain some kind of maturity, but we have to try to find a way to gain maturity without wimping out, without drying up. Because it happens, doesn't it? Like every Thursday or so. We have to find a way to keep our sense of commitment, our sense of joyful participation, these excellent qualities such as patience, such as the ability to discriminate between what is ordinary and what is extraordinary. These amazing characteristics that we endeavor to develop they have to be well developed in us, like a growing child develops musculature, and that musculature helps them to hold themselves up. We have to develop that same kind of strength and wisdom. And I've tried to school us in that ability a little bit by encouraging each and every one of you to find your own depth within that commitment as a bodhisattva. To find your own depth with it and to keep it, well, moist, joyful, fresh. To keep oneself centered in that, but not in a way where there's that constant reaction that is necessary. For instance, if I were to decide that my life is the life of a bodhisattva, and all right, I'm going to do this thing, and that's how it is, so I'm going to be nice to you today. I'm going to be a bodhisattva. I'm going to be compassionate to you today. So you will cross the street when I help you. And, and you will eat what I put in front of you, and that sort of thing. So we have that kind of compassion, which is, well, I'm making fun of it. It's a silly compassion. It's a very ordinary kind of activity. And we think that's what it is. We practice at that superficial level where we try to do something nice, like on Thursday I'm going to go work at a soup kitchen or something, or Friday I'm going to see if anyone's hungry that I can feed, anyone I can be of benefit to. You know, I have all these different activities that I can do. And at each and every one of them, don't you know, I'm going to be looking around to see if everybody thinks I'm cool. I mean, aren't I a good person? I work here for free. Aren't I a good person? I do this, that, and the other thing. And I get so much reward for it. Like the thank you in the eyes of those people that I'm forcing to cross the street. That kind of thing. So we think that that's what we're practicing. We think that that's what the path is. These isolated, separate little things that we can do, that we can count on to bring some kind of response or reaction that we can feel good about. But unfortunately, that's not really what the Buddha Dharma is all about. That's not really the practice. The practice to accomplish something meaningful and worthwhile in the world, the practice to look around and see if you can participate at all in the cessation of suffering, to alleviate suffering in any way, to exhibit kindness. These things, they are part of the path, theoretically. But if all we're going to do, like children, is to do one little thing here, there, and somewhere else in order to see the reaction, in order to see the environment reflect back to us how terrific we are, so that we can be self-satisfied, so that we can feel, oh, just a little bit arrogant, so that we can feel like we're such good people. This is dry, unlovely, unrewarding way of practicing. And the results that come from that are extremely limited. Extremely limited. So now we're thinking about the level that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is referring to when he tells us to be patient with this huge project that we have facing us. He tells us to be patient, and in that there is the understanding that it's not worthwhile, it is not useful to do some good and to have it, well, in a sense, it's like if you do these good things and they're not really integrated into your mind, into your heart, and into your life, they're like little pieces of information in a paragraph that are in parentheses. You know, they can be seen very easily. They stick out when you look at them. And they can be found very easily. There's the beginning and there's an end to it. And it's got a little window. And what you have there is you have an isolated instance in the middle of samsara where you've participated in a certain way. But are we really practicing in the way that the Dalai Lama suggests we will have to? Which means that we've got to be here for the long haul, that we have to practice extraordinary compassion and working very hard for the liberation and salvation of all sentient beings, not only for one lifetime, 1 week, 1 month, 1 day, whatever, but for this extended period to where it becomes part of our own habitual tendency. And what would be the reward then? Because His Holiness was saying, in effect, if you are waiting for signs from your immediate environment, they're not going to be forthcoming. It's not going to be very easy. And you may be disappointed. So what is the reward? The difference in where you're going to see the reward between these two different kinds of practices is that in one case, in the more superficial case, you will be looking to your environment for acknowledgement. You'll be looking for your environment to tell you what a cool person you are for doing all these bodhisattva things. And the deeper kind of practice, the one that gets the broader view, the one that isn't looking for this instantaneous feedback to just get a little hit of energy from what we do, that deeper level of practice involves more change, much more change on a much deeper level. For instance, rather than thinking of our practice as this little book here, and in this little book it has things that we can do to benefit others, like we can pray, we can meditate, we can, there are lists in here. If not this book, one of the other books. There's lots of lists. Buddhism is into lists. We love our lists. So there are the 24 things that you can do and the 87 things that you can't do and all that stuff. So if we practice like that, following all the rules, without something deeper happening within, I really believe that's what His Holiness was talking about when he said not much benefit. Not much practice happening there. It's so easy to become satisfied, isn't it? If you can look in this book and find the 10 things that you're going to do today, and you do every one of them and you go, I made it from 9 to 10. Wow. And aren't I a Buddhist? So you have all these different things that you do, like for instance you're contemplating on the faults of cyclic existence, and so you do that and you have some kind of aha about that. And then you practice reading about the suffering of all sentient beings and reading about the different ways that you can be of benefit to sentient beings, from ordinary perspective to extraordinary perspective. Why I can help old ladies across the street and I can pray for all sentient beings all the time. So I'll do both those things today. So we have all these little things in front of us and all these little lists that we can satisfy ourselves with. But that isn't practice. Because in true practice, what we are looking for here is a real change in the quality of our minds, a real change in a quality of our practice, of our hearts. It blows me away when I hear of practitioners, and my students as well, who are absolutely thrilled with, say, being able to wear robes, or wear a chuba, or something like that, wear a zen even. They're so cool. You know, you get to wear all these different clothings, and you get to have a fancy mala, and pretty soon you have a good collection of fancy malas, and they've all been blessed, and you have, like, you know, really high lamas have blessed this mala, and then really medium lamas have blessed this lama, and then some ordinary, you know, kempos and guys have blessed this lama. So we took it over to the high lamas and got that blessed. So this way, everything's all blessed. And then we've got candles, and we've got crystals, and we've got all these different things. So we're pretty set up now. And we're wearing our robes, and we're doing these little lists, and we're following the rules. But the thing that's supposed to happen isn't happening. And that is a deep change from within. What I have seen with my students is that they'll get to that point where they'll start collecting dharma in that way, and collecting status, collecting pridefulness, collecting little gizmos that go with it. And yet, if you watch the way they live, and watch the way they think, and watch the way they feel, not even the first teeniest little bit of renunciation has actually occurred. We still want our negative habitual tendencies. We still want everybody to act toward us in a certain way. We want people to take care of us. We want people to feel sorry for us. We want people to think we're nice. We want people to think we're attractive. We want people to think whatever it is we want. We keep wanting it. We've got all these lists. We've got all these gizmos. We've got the clothes lined up. And still there's not much change. And although we may partake in some authentic bodhisattva activities from time to time, you know, being part of a group, it'll come up. So if we if we really engage in some bodhisattva activities once in a while, but in our hearts, what is our life about? I mean, when you leave this place, and what's your life about? Is your life about how people respect me? You know, maybe I wear Zen sometimes. What do you got for me? You know, I'm wearing a Zen. What do you think about that? And then enough about me. What do you think about me? So, in our ordinary lives, we walk home as, you know, there's kind of like a stick figure with robes on that we're doing here. And not much heart. And I'm not getting down on you guys. Well, maybe a little, but it's not like that. I'm just using this as an example. It's the same for all of us who are lay people. We've been practicing for many years. We have many gizmos. We have the rap. We walk the walk and talk the talk and dance the dance. But has anything changed? Have we in our hearts demanded of ourselves, required of ourselves, that at every level of practice we will accomplish the true meaning of that practice? For instance, if we're practicing generation stage practice, are we or are we not trying to accomplish pure view? And if we are trying to accomplish pure view, does it stick past the practice? Or do we go back to our stinky old nasty selves? With all our stinky old nasty bad habits? Or having accomplished the practice with dignity, do we then instead maintain Vajra pride, Vajra strength, witnessing ourselves as a display of the deity, not only that, but witnessing all sentient beings as a display of the deity, without exception, all equal? Have we required that to the depth of our capacity, we have to change all the way to the core, so that the bodhicitta is not an idea or a concept that we play with or contemplate about or have lofty thoughts about, lofty ideas about. Instead, is the bodhicitta a living wellspring within our hearts and our minds? Is it something that we can draw on like a wellspring at any time, because it's truly there? Let me give you my understanding of this thing about the Rinpoches, the Tulkus, and how their efforts are, their work is effortless and spontaneous. When it comes to, you talk to the people that hang around me, it doesn't look effortless at all. But there is one thing that is effortless and spontaneous, and that is the decision to always bring benefit to sentient beings no matter what. The gyroscope that you internalize once that decision is complete, and it always points in a certain direction, or it always moves in a certain direction. That is what I believe is spoken of when we talk about the effort of the Rinpoches being, the projects or the works of the Rinpoches being effortless and spontaneous. The effort that ordinary sentient beings are still going through of choice, of choosing to create the habitual tendency of kindness, of loving, of the bodhicitta. That effort is going on, and that is the worst part of it. That's the worst part of it. To vacillate, to not know whether this is a good time to give rise to the bodhicitta, to give rise to the bodhicitta in one's practice, and then walk out into the world and revert. That hurts. You know, you felt it. You know what that's like. To think, oh, we're practicing together here, and the Buddha says, all life is equal. All sentient beings are equal. And then you go out into the world, and you practice that, and you've read it, and you think, that's a beautiful thought. That's just a beautiful thought. And then you go out into the world, and you're not thinking it anymore. You're thinking, oh, that's a beautiful thought. Everybody's equal. All life is equal, except for that cockroach and that worm, and of course that ethnic person over there, and that different person, that different kind of belief, that different kind of custom, that different kind. That's something else. Now, in theory, the Buddha teaches us that all beings are equal, absolutely equal, with not even a thread of difference. That all of us are absolutely equal. And yet, that foundation for the very bodhicitta comes and goes, lives and dies within us. So at this stage in the game, the effort of changing, of creating habitual tendencies that never dissolve, habitual tendencies that are virtuous and proper and beneficial. This is the great effort that must go on for us now. Now we must be putting in the tremendous effort of change. Sometime in the future, we will return in a form to where that effort will not be there. And that's the effortless part. The choice has been made. There is no way to refuse sentient beings. In fact, not a moment, not even a piece of a second, can be wasted on that decision. It's pointless. to come to that day when suddenly there are no choices. We have to make the world a better place. We cannot permit the suffering to go unstopped. We cannot abandon sentient beings. There's no choice in that matter. The choice has been made. And therefore, at that point, the life of a bodhisattva becomes, in that sense, effortless. Because the effort of changing is not there in the same way. There still is an awful lot of effort in the actual workings that we do in order to benefit others. In other words, if I decide, you look too skinny, I'm going to feed you lunch. You know, if I decide that, I still got to go through the effort of making the lunch. No matter how committed I am and how much I've given rise to the bodhicitta and how much habitual tendency there is. But the decision as to whether you're going to feed this person that needs feeding, that's already been made. That's not a hard one. That's effortless. But you still have to make the lunch. You still have to cook it up. Now, I would like for each and every one of you to ask yourselves whether you have really accomplished this. Have you held yourself accountable as a bodhisattva? Do you require that kind of change? Many of you here have held yourselves accountable in your practice, which is really good. Many of you here try to practice every day. You try to practice and not break samaya. You try to keep up your responsibilities and your practice load. Many of you try to do that fairly regularly, maybe not every single day, but fairly regularly. But how many of us have required that we turn ourselves inside out and change from the ground floor up? That compassion becomes so much a part of us that we have truly no other thought. Doesn't mean that we're always thinking about compassion like saints or something, you know, doing this all the time. But it means that what arises in you is fundamentally compassionate in its essence, in its nature. The very fabric of the mind, the very fabric of the heart becomes imbued with this profound habitual tendency to the degree that nothing else shows up. And how is that going to happen? In the same way, of course, as it happens with little children who are growing up, slowly, and with a lot of effort at first. A lot of effort. If you think about how it is for little ones, little children, when they first get the idea that they've got to stand up, they don't just stand up. They go through a lot of different stages and process. And that process is all meaningful. It's not just something silly that kids do when they're flopping around trying to get up. Each one of those things that they do in order to prepare for adulthood is meaningful. Crawling has meaning. The different kinds of activities that kids do on the floor actually has a lot to do with programming their brains. The different kinds of play that children use. You know, they go out in a playground and they're swinging from things and carrying on. They're developing musculature that they need to remain erect and powerful in their posture, to hold themselves up. They're developing an incredible network of fiber, you know, muscular fiber throughout their whole body that will enable them to basically give orders to their body and have their body do what it's told. That capacity is developing. So many of the things that children do, and it takes them years. And if you've ever raised a child, you watch, you know, it's a miracle from one day to the next. There's something new, and the child is so busy, working so hard. You know, one day it's consonants, one day it's vowels, the next day it's walking, and all these amazing, miraculous things are happening, but it takes years. The child does not come out of the womb ready to run and jump in a mature way. The child has to develop that capacity through patterning the brain and growing the muscles and strengthening the bones with a long, long period of effort. And if you ever watch children when they're playing, they are working hard. Harder than they ever will as adults. And they have the energy for it. They're into it, you know? But they're working really hard. Even a little child that lies there on its back and does all this gurgly, drooly stuff, you know, and there's maybe something hanging around on top, and they're just gurgly, drooly kind of focusing on it, and that looks like nothing. That looks like the kid's just laying there doing gurgly, drooly stuff. But in fact, that child is working very hard. That child is working hard on focus. The eyes are working. The brain is working. They're understanding relativity, like if I stick my hand out, it's closer to that thing than if I pull it back. There's a constant stream of programming that is occurring right there. Now that's the very phase that you are all at as students. Growing that kind of muscle, growing that kind of, yeah, you're at the gurgling, drooling stage, it's true. Growing that kind of muscle, patterning the brain, patterning the heart. And like with the child, it has to be done again and again and again. And that's where the effort comes. That's where the discipline is. It isn't from accomplishing lists or things in books. Your main job, and it supersedes everything, whether you are ordained, whether you are a lay person, whether you are advanced or just beginning, your main job, above all, is to give rise to the bodhicitta. It supersedes everything. And to tell you the truth, it's the only thing I want to talk about. To give rise to the bodhicitta to such an extent that when you return again to cyclic existence, in the way that the Lamas return, in the way that His Holiness the Dalai Lama returns, when you return again to cyclic existence, there will be no choice about whether you will be on the path or not. There will be no choice about whether you are going to live the life of a bodhisattva, about whether the environment around you will be bettered by your presence. There's no choice. Hopefully, because in this lifetime, you have demanded that of yourself, required that of yourself. You kept working at it the way that little baby works at it. Constant activity. You know how they keep doing that. It's just constant. Such hard work. And yet there is a joyfulness about it because we are changing. And one day we're going to wake up and we'll finish our practice, and lo and behold, the bodhicitta will not go away. Just because we're not thinking about it at that moment, it will not simply disappear like dew in the sun. It will remain with us, and it will guide our lives, and our lives will be about compassion. When I first met His Holiness Pena Rinpoche, who is the Lama who is the head of our lineage and who recognized me, he asked me what it was I was teaching these people, because I wasn't a Buddhist yet. Not until he told me, anyway. And I told him, well, I teach them about compassion and about emptiness, about wisdom, and I just sort of recanted some of the things that I'm teaching. And he started laughing and he said, that's amazing, that's Mahayana Buddhism. All you have to do now is learn some of the tantric technology, and that's pretty much right on the money. He said, you're teaching Buddhism. And I thought, cool, I knew there was a name for it, I just didn't know what it was. And actually, later on, I asked him, I said, how does this happen? How does this happen? I mean, apparently, I had been giving teachings that correlate with Chud and Nundro and different hallmark Buddhist teachings. So I asked him, how does this happen? And he said, well, in the past you must have been a bodhisattva many, many times, and you practiced really hard and accomplished your practice. And so now, think about this. In every lifetime, when you return, you will give rise to the teachings naturally. That's it. That's what I'm talking about. This is certainly not unique to me. The lamas that return again and again for the sake of sentient beings, this is what they do. Now, how did that happen? Did it happen because we were casual on the path? Did it happen because we remembered all those lists? Did it happen because we very anally did all of a mala of every deity we have samaya with in our whole lives? Every day? Was it like that? No, it's because we required ourselves to change to the depth of our beings for the sake of sentient beings. We required ourselves to give rise to the bodhicitta. And at some point, we must have decided that nothing else was acceptable. So, with each and every one of us, it's time for us to start thinking, when will we actually come to that point? When will that actually happen, when we stop playing dress-up Dharma and develop a good heart? When is that going to happen? When is it going to happen that compassion is not a practice or a word in one of those lists, but rather than that, it is the core of our being? When is it going to happen that we're going to pick up the practice of the Buddha and hear all that stuff about renunciation and actually give up being so darn needy? When is it going to happen that we actually listen to the Buddha's teaching when the Buddha says, all suffering comes from desire? When is that going to connect in our minds to where we practice that renunciation? When are we going to practice in such a way that we understand the equality of all that is? Even to the degree that we understand that this and this are essentially the same in their nature, just as you and I are. And live like we believed it. See, that's the thing, because I have students wearing robes who are incredibly needy and just bounce around from situation to situation trying to get their needs filled. And I have lay students who do the same thing. Many of us are stuck somewhere, you see? And so the kind of mature practice that His Holiness the Dalai Lama speaks of when he says, well, it's going to take a long time. We're in it for the long haul. Let's not be looking for completion dates here. When are we going to develop that kind of strength that says, no matter what I see, no matter what I feel, no matter what, my life is about compassion, and that's the only choice I'm ever going to make? And I'm not going to look in your eyes and expect a return for it. I'm not going to look into my environment and expect some kind of approval. Lord knows if I were doing this job for approval, would that be pathetic? So, when is that baby stuff going to stop and we actually become practitioners? It's amazing. We as human beings, we like to find a comfortable niche to stay in, don't we? We love our comfort zones, honey. We love them. And I'm going to use an example of one of my students. She's not here. She's at my house. Her name is Alana. And I know she's far enough away where if she decides to kill me, she can't make it before I get it all out. She's slower than I am. So I remember long after Alana had become a nun, and she was living at my house and helping me with a tira with my daughter. And she was attending, but actually not only attending as she's doing now, but she was actually living in my house with my family, and became very comfortable family kind of situation. We used to make jokes how Alana and I did, how when we got old, we'd be sitting on the front steps of the, or sitting on the front of the temple, both in our rocking chairs, you know, and we'd be going, now whose teeth are these? I can't. So we had all these ideas about what that's going to be like, and it was real family. It was just real family. And then one day I decided I really could see that there were certain elements of my family that were too crowded, that weren't working that way. So I asked Alana if she would live somewhere else. She went through hell. I mean, she had found this comfort zone with our family and had found so much love in that. She literally went through hell. And the one day, Gyaltsen Rinpoche looked at her and said, "What is your problem? I thought you were a nun. I thought you were practicing the Buddhist teachings. I thought you were about renunciation. Why would you leave the world to be a nun and then go back to it with desire? Why would you do that?" And he kind of slapped her around a little bit. You know how Rinpoche is. Not really slapped her around, but gave her a good slamming. And it knocked her up straight. And she began to understand that she went through all the trouble of really becoming a Buddhist practitioner, wearing the robes. Now here we're practicing no drinking, we're practicing celibacy, we're practicing all these different hardships in order to be renounced of the world, in order to really focus on our path. And then she turns around and starts focusing on that kind of ordinary neediness. And so what's that all about? Now don't be looking at Alana going, because this is something we all do. We find our little comfort zone in our practice, and that's where we stay. The term I use is playing church. So what I can tell you about that is, first of all, it's useless. And second of all, I won't play. I just won't. You'll have to find somebody else to play with if you want to play church. Because I think it's a waste of time. It's not to say that the discipline, that the liturgical calendar, that the practices, these are definitely not a waste of time. But these are tools. They are tools. They are not the ultimate expression of you as a Buddhist. You're not supposed to come out of this an excellent practitioner. You're supposed to come out of this awake. And the awakening is the bodhicitta. You can't get by without it. You're not going to get out of this path without practicing the bodhicitta. You have to. And it's got to change you utterly. But unfortunately, many of us have this goal in our minds that we are going to be excellent practitioners. And we think that's really what it's all about. Well, I beg to differ. If that's what your religion is, you are literally practicing a different religion than I am. I would love for us all to practice the same religion. And I have to go with His Holiness the Dalai Lama when he said, "My religion is kindness." From everything I understand about the Mahayana path, from everything I understand about the Vajrayana path, the most essential ingredient, that vow that supersedes everything, even self-concern, is the vow of bodhicitta. Witness how in our religion, although if we follow the Vinaya, monks should never touch females, but as a bodhisattva, if a monk were to see a female that was harmed and needed help in the road, he would pick her up. Is there any non-virtue there? Of course not. Of course not. In order to fulfill our obligation as a bodhisattva, we have to do these things. So I think at some point, each and every one of us, we have to kind of look inside and decide, what's the bottom line here? What vow are we holding? What is it that we're trying to do? Sometimes, you know, if I go away for a long time, I hear about people saying, oh, I'm hanging on to the path by a thread or something like that. Why? Because you're not being entertained enough? Do you get Comedy Central here? You know, I recommend South Park. It's a great little... If you need more entertainment, you are free to go and get it. But if you need a path, there's only one way to do that, and that is within you, to give rise to that determination, to practice that kind of effort now, to demand of yourself that you don't wimp out anymore, to demand of yourself that you're not going to walk around just getting and needing and getting and needing and calling yourself a renunciate at the same time. But you have to give rise to compassion in the deepest and most profound way that you can. For me, there are lots of things that we can compromise on. Like, for instance, I'm going through another rebellion about chubas. You know, I do that periodically. Sometimes I'll wear them, and sometimes it's like, forget it. So I'm going through another one of those chuba rebellions. And I feel like that's okay, because I don't really care if you see me wearing all the Dharma clothes, or if you see me not wearing the Dharma clothes. I don't think that my faith is something I wear on my body. I don't think that's how it goes. I figure if you can't see a compassionate heart when I'm wearing Levi's, it ain't there. What can I tell you? But there are some things I find cannot be compromised. That are, you can't argue with them. These are the things that are, these are faultless truths that I know within my own mind that I could not debate with anyone, because for me to give rise to a life experience is to give rise to this choice. It is so old. I've made it so long ago. And that choice is, when I leave this world, is it or is it not going to be a better place? Am I going to do everything I can to make a difference? Am I going to live the life of a bodhisattva? That's not compromisable. And I promise you, no matter what I'm wearing, that doesn't change. It never changes. So this is the level that each of us has to come to, and your job is to come to it now. Here is where you practice in that way. The only way to practice the Buddha's teachings honorably is to accomplish what the Buddha has set out for us to accomplish, to awaken to our own primordial wisdom nature, which is the great bodhicitta, which is indistinguishable from the bodhicitta. Otherwise, we are taking the Buddha's teachings and we're dressing ourselves with them, or we're putting them in our pockets to cash them in for something else, you know, or we're collecting them and decorating our house with them, but we are not giving rise to the bodhicitta. So that is the point, and I want to use this teaching as a way to lead into the Good Heart Retreat. That is now and will always be my main focus. That vow that supersedes everything and is the crown on the lotus of your heart. In closing, the bodhicitta is not something that you have to grow. That's where the analogy with the baby falls apart, you see. Because the analogy with the baby is that the baby has to grow muscles. You don't have to grow the bodhicitta. You have to awaken to it. You have to realize it. But the bodhicitta is one's nature. It is the primordial ground of being in its display form. So as we come into the world and activate our potential and awaken to our Buddha nature, what we give rise to is the bodhicitta. And in the same way that the rays of the sun warm the world, this bodhicitta makes a difference. So I hope that you will think about that and start asking yourselves some questions before the retreat. I'd really like to see a little bit of honesty here. I'd like to see a little bit of readiness to reintegrate with our paths, to refresh ourselves at this great fountain, to give ourselves an alternative to dress up Dharma. And finally, and most importantly, to love.